Yes. Where are we looking?
Okay, we're live. We're live. We're live.
We're supposed to be looking there.
We're supposed to be looking there. Let's get all the guys in here.
We're going live here at the Big Metal Voice Studio on Canadian Day. It's the 150th anniversary of our home country of Canada.
See, this is the loop that I was talking about. We have to click that off there. Okay, sending Dave Carlo a link to join. We are now sending a link to Tim to join.
Tim from Brave Words, of course.
Yeah,
Metal Mag.
That's right.
Imperial.
That's right. So, Alan, here's the deal. Yesterday, I was on with Dave, I was on with Tim, and we were having like a complete breakdown.
Here's the Canadian flag. Oh, metal on metal.
So I was on with Tim yesterday, I was on with Dave, and everything went to hell. Technically, things were friggin' going to hell. We could not get everybody online. So everybody knows that at 12:45 or 12:40 today, we tried again this test. And it worked. It worked. So, but this is that was a test one. This is the actual.
We're going live.
We're going live. So let's just.
Who we got? Dave from Razor.
Dave Carlo from Razor, and Tim Henderson from Brave Words. So I sent them the link. But first, let's enjoy a couple of minutes of our Canadian flag. There it is, Alan.
That's the official flag.
And
of course, Canada stands for Metal Brothers in Arms. It's the Ojibwa term.
Ojibwa?
Yeah.
Is that the right pronunciation?
That's it, Ojibwa.
It means village.
No, it means Metal Brothers in Arms. So
okay.
For today's purpose.
Yeah.
And you can see all the different points of the maple leaf.
Yep. And just so everybody knows, the Canadian flag, for all those Canadians out there, non-Canadians, I'll just tell you a little bit about the history. Okay.
The red on each side represents the two
borders, the two oceans.
Pacific and Atlantic.
The white, guess what that represents?
That's just complete snow.
Snow. And the maple leaf is...
Each point represents a province.
And
which should be updated, right? Because we've added a few territories.
And here's the cool thing. So the maple leaf, which is only grown in the eastern part of Canada, our country, where there's no actual maple trees on the other side, but that's neither here nor there. That is our national...
Maple syrup is worth more than oil.
Yeah.
So that's one of the most expensive liquids on the earth.
Yes.
And we have the real thing here, not those ones that come in a little...
we have hop. We have maple syrup shots. So everybody, we're waiting for Dave Carlo from Razor to join.
Razor
from
Ottawa.
Here we go. There's a couple of props. I always like props. There you go. Evil invaders.
Again, guys,
they have a great.
There's another Canadian flag.
That's another Canadian flag, and that's the shirt we got from Anvil. Look at that. There we go. We're going to be talking about the history of metal in Canada. Maple syrup. Sean.
We got Sean Black on board. Metal syrup.
I actually should.
You put some of that on your shredded leather in the morning, and a little. Of course, being the 150th anniversary of Canada.
Oh, there he is. Dave
is on.
Dave Carlo, guitarist of Razor. Dave, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, thanks. Hopefully you guys can see me okay.
Yeah. Everything looks good. You look great.
Good.
We can start off before Tim joins us. Can you tell us about the paralysis you just recently got on the side of your face?
Yeah. Back in March, I got I woke up and I thought I was having a stroke. This is about a week after getting back from South America. We had done a little tour there, and I got sick down there, just like a chest infection, mainly from all the flights. So when I got back, recovered for about a week, thought I was feeling better. Then I woke up one day and the right side of my face was paralyzed. I thought I was having a stroke. So I went to the hospital. And, diagnosis of exclusion. Basically, they did all kinds of tests. They told me I wasn't having a stroke, so that was good news. But, I have this condition called Bell's palsy. My face is half paralyzed, and they say it could last anywhere from 4 to 9 months.
Yeah.
It makes using words that start with F or P a little challenging. and it looks a little different when I talk. I look a little more like Jean Chrétien now, but that's fine, not a big deal. I'll get better, and that's the good news. And I'm not embarrassed about anything, so I don't mind going playing shows or explaining my situation to anybody. So it's a good thing to get that out, get that out there, so that people, when they go, hey, why is he talking funny? What's wrong with him? They don't think I just came back from the dentist or something.
What's funny, Dave, you're like the third person I know that has got this in the last year.
I know. You know what? I never heard of this before, and since I got it, I've heard a whole bunch of stories from people who've had it. Including Scott Watts from Sacrifice, bass player from Sacrifice. He told me he had it a few years back. Took him 4 months. So I'm at 3 months right now. So I'm hoping that it starts to get better. It's a bit better than it was when it first started. So not as good as I'd like it to be by now, but I think it's going to get better.
And Dave, as we're waiting for Tim Henderson to join from Brave Words, tell us about your vision. A lot of people don't know this, and I think it's something interesting to bring up. I mean, it's amazing how you play guitar. And just talk a little about your vision issues.
Yeah, I have something called Stargardt's dystrophy. If anybody's interested, that's spelled Stargardt. Stargardt's dystrophy, and it's a condition that usually it happens to older people. It's called AMD, age-related macular degeneration. I'm losing my central vision in my eyes, and central vision is, obviously when you're looking directly at something, you can, like reading and detail vision is what I lack. So, for example, I can see people walking around, on the street. I couldn't tell you male or female. I can't, even my audience. When I'm performing live, I see the people, but I can't make out the, who's who or anything like that. People who know me well, who are friends of mine, if they run into me somewhere, they know that they have to go, Dave, and they tell me who it is, because I would never be able to recognize somebody like just on sight. So, I can't see my fingers when I play the guitar. I can't see my hands. I use my peripheral vision to do it. I'm pretty comfortable feeling my way around a guitar. I've been playing for a long time. When I do my lead, my solos, it's a bit of a challenge because, you get up to the smaller frets and you can't see what you're doing. It's all on feel. So every now and then there's a screw up, but, generally it's nothing really noticeable. I think, performing is still pretty solid on stage. So
it's amazing how you've, and I mean, Steve Grimmett went to South America. He went to Ecuador and he lost his leg. I mean, there are different, viruses out there, bacterias, and there's so many things that we're not accustomed to in North America that sort of, that you got to be, careful of. I mean, the locals, they're used to that environment, the bacteria, the virus, or whatever it is, right?
Whereas that's true.
And even if they came to see us, I mean, there would be other issues, right? It's just we're not used to that.
Hangovers.
Yeah. Bob Reed, our singer, he was really sick down there for 2 shows. 2 of the shows we did, he was like throwing up and running to the bathroom constantly and just really, really sick. And I mean, it was, he ate something down there that didn't agree with him, and that's what happened. So, you're absolutely right. It's we have to, I guess, our bodies aren't really, ready to handle some of the viruses that are down there. All us, northern guys.
Yes. Hey, Dave, what was the starting point for you in Canadian hard rock, heavy metal? Like, where did it begin? Was it Steppenwolf? Who started this all?
From a Canadian standpoint, you'd have to actually think about bands like Bachman Turner Overdrive, Rush, even Triumph. I was never a huge fan of Triumph, but I mean, just the hard edge sound. I was a fan of Bachman Turner Overdrive and Rush back in the day. And that in the 70s, like the early 70s, that was the hard edge sound that was coming out of Canada. And, eventually, other Canadian bands, showed up. I would say the first real metal Canadian band that comes to my mind is probably Anvil. And, shortly after them, Exciter. Those would be, yes, there you go, nice shirt. I would say that probably the first, like, this metal, where I would call that metal, as opposed to hard rock. And, so I would say those ones. That's the band. Anvil was the band that as a 15, 16-year-old, I was partying to in the summer and with my buddies and cranking up Hard and Heavy, the first Anvil album. April Wine should have been mentioned too. Absolutely.
So that's it. Reading Miles Goodwin's autobiography. I mean, he knew if he wanted to get to the States, he had to go for that harder sound, harder rock sound, and that's where they came up with stuff like I Want to Rock and everything off of Harder, Faster, and that kind of led into them. But again, these are the type of bands. Helix was doing the bars at that time.
Albanova with a big hit, Life is a Fantasy, and that started to sort of, I wouldn't call it glam. Would you call it glam? What would you call it?
It was Bon Jovi before Bon Jovi. It was
what was Bon Jovi?
Beginning of hair metal.
It was the beginning.
I mean, this guy he wrote on some of the Bon Jovi's albums, but again, we have a lot of bands here, like Tim was saying, we didn't get the recognition, but they were instigators. They were there before a lot of this other success from the American bands.
And then here's a band that you know, Dave. It's Helix. Then out of 1982, give me an R, give me an O, give me a C, give me a K. Brian Vollmer and Helix, who's been on this show too. Any thoughts about Helix and how they?
Well, Helix goes back to the 70s, right? Like I'm from Guelph, which is right near Kitchener, so we're very familiar with Helix. They were around back in the 70s. They were gigging, and their first album I think was like 79, I think, when they did their first album. We almost ended up being managed by Helix's manager in the early 80s. He thought we were too heavy. William Seep, that was Helix's manager at the time. He liked Razor. He came out to see us and stuff, but he thought we were too heavy for the scene, which was a common problem I had with Razor at the time. Everybody we talked to in the Canadian mainstream, from a management or radio stations or even record companies, a lot of them just said we were too heavy. We did get a Canadian record deal, but that was a big problem as far as not the fans. The fans were totally into the metal, but the music industry in Canada wasn't with the program really at that point. So that was frustrating. But as far as Helix goes, Helix was just like considered. They had a lot of there was a lot of reverence for them in our area for sure.
And going back to the No Rest for the Wicked album is the first time great songs on there. Never Want to Lose You being one of my favorites. And then, of course, like Jimmy said, Walking on the Razor's Edge with the success of Rock You, the cover version of the Foot in Cold Water, Make Me Do Anything You Want. That had 2 or 3 hits off there. And unfortunately, I mean, Brian, like Jimmy said, has been on the show, didn't see a lot of money. So maybe it was a good thing he didn't sign with William Seep. I mean,
I think in hindsight, I think you're right. I heard some stories. Brian is very good friends with Bob Reed, our singer. So I get a lot of Helix information through Bob. He talks to me about what's been going on with him, and absolutely. But I always thought of Helix more of a hard rock band than a metal band. Exactly. So to me, Helix belongs in that category with the BTOs and the April Wines and the Rush and Triumph. Rush is kind of in a category all their own because of the progressive sound. But
we should start with. Like Dave just said, we should start this whole show saying, okay, Rush is completely apart from everything we're talking about today.
I mean, there's also Thor.
They cross so many boundaries; it's hard to categorize.
But Alan, there's also Thor, right? Thor. I mean, who started in the late '70s as well, right? And he kind of he brought weightlifting to and bodybuilding to metal. But I've seen his documentary, and I've talked to Thor, and thanks Razorfist for pointing that out. Thor played I wouldn't say a huge role, but he was in. Dave, tell me what it was like in the business side of things in the early '80s, trying to get a record deal, and not only for Razor, but just in general. What was the atmosphere like?
Okay, well, we didn't do the traditional thing because we saw, we were friends with a lot of other bands at the time who were also trying to get noticed, and what we saw was, the typical thing that was happening was bands would get together, they'd make a demo tape, they would start shopping it around, they'd start sending it out and following up phone calls, dropping it off at radio stations. We decided to go a different route because we thought, okay, that's like almost a dime a dozen approach now. And, a lot of record companies are almost predisposed to telling you they're not interested right off the bat. Some of the greatest bands of all time were rejected multiple times by record companies and managers. So what we decided to do was put our money where our mouth was. We invested in the first EP that we did. We financed that ourselves. And by putting that on vinyl and investing in a higher quality recording, we thought that would cause people to take notice a little faster, and it did. Exactly what happened. And we went that route and decided that let's go right to the fans. Let's try to bypass record companies and managers. Let's just get an album out. Let's take it right into the record stores. Make a deal with the retailers, which was easy to do. It's very simple. We just went into the stores and we said, we'll give you these records. You don't have to pay us anything until they're sold. And, if you don't sell any in a couple of months, we'll take them back. Every store we went to agreed to that deal. And because metal is the kind of music that fans would be looking to discover new bands all the time, we sold the album just on the look of the album, how it appeared at the store. Sitting on the rack, 12-inch EP called Armed and Dangerous. Turn it over. It had heavy song titles. People would buy it because it was worth it, to check it out. It was a Canadian band. We had the curiosity factor, and that got us noticed a lot faster.
To Alan.
So the record company, to give you that, just to add to that, then the record company, Attic Records, which is the company that offered us the first recording that we were offered. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of stories there. We have a lot we could tell you about that, but they wanted to sign us because they were aware of the fact that our EP was selling well. So it wasn't a hard business decision for them because they saw that it was selling already. So they knew that with minimal investment, they could have us on the roster and they could be putting out something that would sell.
And the key word being their business decision, right, Dave?
Oh, no doubt. Totally.
But we're missing out a huge thing here. We're missing out a band that really started the whole thing. I don't think we mentioned this or not. It's Exciter, right? And I know Dan Beeler has told me that they couldn't get a record deal in Canada, so they had to go to the U.S., which was Megaforce, I think, at the time, right? They got their deal, and
they went to
then when they had success, did Canada, distribute everything.
Exciter was with Shrapnel. Jim Varney, Shrapnel Records. That was the first Exciter release.
That's right.
That was Heavy Metal Maniac. Now, where did Exciter come from? Exciter was right shortly after Anvil and just before Razor. Yeah. That's kind of the chronology of what happened. Anvil was out first, 81, Hard and Heavy. Then Exciter came out. First of all, Exciter was on a compilation called U.S. Metal Volume 2,
that's right,
which was put out by Shrapnel Records, Jim Varney, and they had a song called World War III. That was the first Exciter song that was recorded that I'm aware of. Heavy Metal Maniac came out, I think, in 83, and then Razor REP came out in early 84. So Exciter was just taking... Exciter was a really important band in Canadian metal because they kind of bridged the gap between just heavy metal, which would be like Judas Priest style heavy metal, and thrash. And Exciter is kind of like high energy Motorhead type of style all the time. And one of my top two favorite Canadian bands. My two favorite Canadian bands are Exciter and Sacrifice. Those are my top two. And Exciter was just like really important band in Canadian metal history, actually in all metal history.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Dave. I mean, it was raining today. I had all these things on vinyl. I walked over, so I didn't want to get them wet. But like you said, Heavy Metal Maniac, Violence and Force, Long Live the Loud. Exciter is so underrated when it comes to the history of metal, especially Canadian metal. But again, in the entire history of metal, Exciter is one of the bands that was there. And they took it in a completely different direction than anybody else, including Anvil. Including Anvil, they took it in a different direction, and they were a predecessor to a lot of stuff that was to follow from the States. And don't forget, they were touring down there before guys like Anthrax. We even got a recording. They were still in the very early stages. They were close to signing, but these guys are down there touring, so they had influence on all what was traditionally known as the Big Four coming out of the States afterwards. And
they were the first real drummer singing band. I mean, it could have been detrimental to them as well, right? But at the same time, it was like freaky to see the drummer singing heavy metal.
Gilmore with Triumph, right?
But I mean, he had like a real metal. He was like one of the first metal drummers. I don't even know if there are any metal drummers singing heavy metal anymore. I mean,
that's a tough gig, man. That Dan Beeler is he's like the ninth wonder of the world. I mean, he's amazing, and we've played shows with him, and I've seen him live even before when we weren't playing with him. But to put out that much energy as a drummer and to sing at the same time, that's nuts. I mean, that's really incredibly skilled to be able to pull that off.
Right.
Cider's a band you never get tired of seeing. I mean, they're just an amazing live band, and they're also, just they're awesome guys too. They're very humble. They're just everything about them is amazing. That's all I could say.
So
but what are your favorite bands, Alan? And I know Alan always wants to bring this up. Then you have Coney Hatch, who's sort of like coming out of nowhere. Like
produced by Kim Mitchell from Max Webster.
Right? You have Coney Hatch, and you talked about Coney Hatch, Alan.
I mean, back in the day, first album came out. I remember, like yesterday, I bought the Scorpions Blackout, and I bought Coney Hatch's first album, and I much preferred the Coney Hatch.
Yeah.
And Scorpions Blackout, that was their that's the end all and be all. If you're a Scorpion fan, that was the one that.
Well, I love Scorpions Blackout. I think it's an amazing album. Coney Hatch to me is solid hard rock music, which is good too, right? Like, I mean, okay, so we like heavy metal, but we like hard rock too. Like, I love AC/DC, and AC/DC is hard rock. I wouldn't call AC/DC metal, but it's cutting edge, hard edged rock, and especially up until eventually they started mailing it in because they had too much money and whatever. But the early days, the heyday of AC/DC was really powerful, heavy, hard rock. And Coney Hatch is in that vein too, right? It's heavy, hard rock. That first album was produced by Kim Mitchell. It's a good style. I saw them open for Judas Priest actually in Toronto in 1982. So, I just make those distinctions in my head, right? I go, okay, metal or hard rock. If it's metal, I won't compare Coney Hatch to Anvil, for example, because to me it's almost two different genres. Even though I like them both, it's not comparable to me. It's more like Coney Hatch is more trying to. They want to be, I think they're trying to be. What's the word I'm looking for? I think they're trying to be a little more mainstream. I guess that's the word I'm looking for.
Like April Wine, like Triumph. They fit more into that.
Yeah, that stuff is still good. It's still good, and I still love. If I hear it in the radio or something, I'll crank it up, and enjoy it. But it's kind of it just depends on what I'm in the mood for.
We can make that distinction, but another band. So now we're talking the early '80s. Another band that's one of my favorites, and you can debate if this is metal or hard rock, just like Dave said. But they were doing stuff, and they had a certain career going more with the American mainstream. It was Killer Dwarfs.
Oh, yes. A
great band. The first album was much different than the later stuff. All great quality albums. Do they sound, that track off of the fourth album? Does it sound like that track off the second album? Yeah, but that was their style. So everybody had a style. But you're talking a band that had their style, which was really Killer Dwarfs, and a great band to see live. And one of my favorites.
Especially with the tricycle.
Another band who had a manager at the time who thought Razor was too heavy because he was looking at us too. Andy Wigderson thought we were too heavy, passed on us. But Killer Dwarfs to me, again, I know they have a song called Heavy Mental Breakdown, but they're to me a rock band, a hard rock band more than a metal band.
Yeah, and then you got coming out of the West at that time, you had Kick-Axe.
Kick-Axe.
Again, the same thing. We can debate this all day long, but I would put them more in the hard rock.
I don't even know. I know the name. But I think I might have filed them in the back of my head under not really interested. I don't know.
No, wait a second.
I know. Jimmy is 48 years old. How old are you?
He's 48.
Jimmy's 48, right? How old are you?
Same age. He's the same age.
Same age.
Okay. See, we're close to the same age, right? But I may make a difference because I'm 53 in about 2 weeks. So that's about 5 years, right?
Hey,
when's 5 years?
Hey, when's your
July 11th. July 11th.
21st is my birthday. We're brothers.
Which is yours?
July 21st.
Man? Oh, okay.
My birthday.
Hey, good month. Good month to be born. Nice. I mean, it's nice. Nice. It's always nice weather and everything on my birthday. It's beautiful. But at that time, the metal scene, there was a lot of judging going on, which is now we're at a point where things are a little different now. But when you get older, you start to appreciate all forms of music much more than you did when you were younger. Metal guys were all about metal and nothing else. It was like metal or death to posers, like this kind of attitude, right? Definitely. And so there was these judgments being made, and what would happen is that I was firmly on the side of the extreme metal stuff. So we weren't like, for example, guys were walking around with Anvil and Exciter patches and Sacrifice and Razor patches and stuff and studs and leather, right? But they weren't doing that for bands like Coney Hatch. They were doing that for bands like Killer Doors. There wasn't, you wouldn't see that, right? There was this like religious kind of devotion to those hard edge metal bands.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Dave.
And that's kind of, so like when you mentioned Kick-Axe, I think, okay, what was that? It was probably something like, I don't even know what they sound like, but I'm guessing probably something like Black and Blue or Keel or some of those other bands that we just kind of zoned on at that time. We didn't pay attention, you know, like Rat and Quiet Riot, and they were big, right? We didn't pay any attention. We just zoned out on those guys because those guys to us were just like mainstream, not even really hard edged rock, more cock rock, we called that stuff, right? Like more about that. And that wasn't our thing at all. We weren't in this to pose for the ladies. That wasn't our thing, right? And you know, so that's, you can tell by looking at those artists back then the difference. I don't even have to hear their music. I can look at how they're dressed and the way they present themselves to tell, okay, that band's probably not really as heavy enough for my taste, you know, just by looking at it.
So we got that. We got the Killer Doors. We got the Lee Aarons. We got the Kick-Axe.
Well, I want to say something about Kick-Axe. Hold on.
Then you got the other side, you know, of bands that came.
Voivod. Well,
now,
before we go into Voivod, I want to just say something about Kick-Axe. I saw Kick-Axe live for the first time, opening up for the Scorpions. Now, they were supposed to be a Canadian version of Quiet Riot. That's what Kick-Axe was.
Well, they were produced by Pasha and Spencer
That's
Crawford.
Right, so. Exactly. They were supposed to be the Canadian Quiet Riot because Quiet Riot had a big hit, so they wanted
Get on the road to rock. Remember that? Up the creek.
If you need a singer, Dave, here you go. Right there.
Yeah. These are bands that I didn't pay any attention to.
So I saw Kick-Axe open up for the Scorpions at the Montreal Forum. I think it was the Montreal Forum back then. And let me tell you, nobody knew them back then. They just blew everyone away because what's the singer's name? Christian?
George Christie.
George Christie. He was Kristen. The singer of Kick-Axe was phenomenal. I mean, blew Kevin DuBrow right out of the water. That's what, and they had the big back vocals. They were just a great.
They had the hair.
They had the hair. They were just an incredible band.
Dave's point.
So I don't want to classify them into sort of the.
We're all Canadian today. We're Canadians.
I just think that these guys were a great band. Had 2 great albums. I don't know what they're doing now. I think they're still.
They had a 4th album that came out about a decade ago.
Yeah, I don't know them. I would have to hear them. And you know, the thing is, I try to be open-minded about everything now. So difference between me today and me 35 years ago is there's an open mind to everything. Let me listen and I'll evaluate on what I think are its own merits. But you know, I like all styles of music now for the most part. Not everything, but I can listen to just about anything.
So let's get Dave's opinion on Voivod. Now here's a band that came out of Quebec. They're 300 miles north of Montreal. They're coming out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, in Europe, they're gigantic. I mean, this is redefining techno, metal, industrial, whatever you want to call it. They shook the world on edge. I mean, here's a band that, again, here in this country, very little people even talk about it.
Yeah, I think the first album was like, I didn't get anything really industrial or techno off that first album. It's just heavy. You know, over the top. It's great metal, and you know, I loved Voivod, and I love those early Voivod releases. I think the best one they did that I've heard, without question, was their 3rd album. It's Killing Technology. It was a fantastic recording. Every song is amazing. The first album was really like it just seemed like a really heavy underground band, you know, and they were out just around the same time as us. You know. Because I remember going to, there used to be a record store in Toronto that we used to go to all the time called the Record Peddler, and that's where we would go and pick up our, you know, new metal albums, imports. They had all the imports, and they had, you know, they had the Voivod album right away when it first came out. That's where I heard it. I heard it cranked up in the store, in the record store, and I went and talked to the guy who, you know, who works there, who was Brian Taylor, the guy who ended up producing a couple of our albums. He told me, he turned me on to Voivod, and he said, you know, this just came in, it's amazing, check it out, right? And War and Pain, right? Put it on, it was, you know, awesome. So,
you know, actually,
that was a great band, man.
So Dave, for me, it was actually later on, like I mentioned, Atros and you know, Nothing Face, and those were the albums that I kind of like, because they were kind of like going into that Rush.
Yeah, you like that? Did you like that?
Yeah, for Voivod.
We're on different
I had a hard
wavelengths.
time listening to those first few albums. Sorry about that.
See, now you and I are totally different then, because you're polar opposite of me. I love those first few albums. Nothing Face, I couldn't have zoned more on it. It was, to me, it was like, I don't know what these guys are doing anymore, but they've lost me, right? It's just, you know, I'm too hard at, like, it's just wasn't, I wasn't into the experimental vibe that was going on there. I liked the overkill aspect of their heaviness. That's how I saw it.
I think it's the production on those first few albums that sort of, it was hard for me to just sit through a whole album when the production was probably one of the worst productions, you know, in metal history. Like, well, I guess
Which one?
I guess that one's pretty like top there, right?
The first album?
They're tough listens.
First album? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, for Voivod.
It's a dark kind of production. It's probably, you know, I mean, you got to remember that people will judge Metallica's Black Album on the same scale that they'll judge Razor's Evil Invaders. Razor's Evil Invaders was recorded and mixed in 2 days. 2 days. No, recorded and mixed in 2 days. If we're ready for the truth, I will tell you the truth. Okay, 2 days. Now, what did we do? We went into a expensive high-end studio, and we determined that we would rather spend less time in a really good studio than spend a lot of time in a shitty studio. So we had to have our act together. We were very tight musically, so we went in there, no nonsense, all business, 10 o'clock in the morning, daytime session, and just got in there and got our sound as quick as we could, track after track, first take, keepers. You will hear mistakes on the album because we didn't have time to correct them. But we did that in the interest of trying to get the best sound quality overall. We did the best we could, but 2 days. Now, Metallica, Black Album, I'm guessing they took 2 months on the drum sound. Okay, so, but still, people will go, oh, the Metallica Black Album is a 9.5 out of 10. Evil Invaders production is weak. Well, you know, there is a difference in the amount of resources you have at your disposal to make these recordings. And that kind of has to be considered when you're listening to this stuff. You know, to get a listenable mix can be done with you know, less investment, but there are, you know, there's going to be differences, right? I mean, the nuances and all the finesse that isn't going to be there. So the first Voivod album is really raw sounding, raw and mean. But yes, is it a high-end production? No. None of the albums that were done, you know, in the early years by up-and-coming thrash bands are high-end productions. The money wasn't there to do it.
So we have coming out of there, Voivod. We got now other small bands out of here in Quebec. We got Death Dealer. We got Sword. I remember being outside of Rock and Stock down on Crescent Street. Our local record store that had all the
Michelle Mies. I know Michelle Mies.
Yeah, and right upstairs was Death Dealer. Sorry, Death Dealer recording and basically rehearsing the whole first album. And we were just sitting outside the record store listening to the whole thing. They were a great band. And Sword, who opened up for Metallica.
I know those guys too.
Store here.
Fist.
I know those guys because Maurice Richard, not the Rocket, but Maurice Richard, the manager of Voivod at the time, was working with some of those bands, and we were friends. And I used to talk to Maurice regularly, and he would send me some of the demos. He sent me Sword. He sent me Aggression. Yeah, I knew the Death Dealer guys only because they came to our shows and we talked to them. I don't think I ever heard them. I know their bass player loves Steve Harris because I remember he had a conversation with us where he kept mentioning that over and over again. But you know, I remember Rock and Stock too, at Crescent Street in Montreal. Great store. Great store. Montreal's a great metal city, man. We had a lot of fun in Quebec. Quebec was my favorite place in Canada to play in the 80s because the crowds were nuts. And it was like Europe, you know. It's like that really appreciation of metal. It was fantastic.
So check this out, Dave. I'm in another record store about a year ago, and I look up on the wall, and here's Death Dealer's Journey into Fear, their second album that was never, ever, ever released. There's a label out there that's buying all these old unknown albums and re-releasing them. And here's an album that I didn't even know exists that was supposed to be released, I think, back in '88. And like you said, you can hear the Maiden influence a little too strong for my taste. The first album I didn't find there had nearly that much. But yeah, Death Dealer is definitely a lot Maiden influence. So
wait a second, there's another band we forgot.
Yeah, we forgot. Here's the guy that was in town last night.
So Annihilator.
Jeff Waters. Yeah.
I spoke to twice. Once in April, once now. Just recently. I mean, huge. I mean, maybe the second wave, probably more in 86, 87 with
late
albums
80s,
and
late
down.
80s.
Yeah,
I remember hearing about them around 88, 89. Yeah.
I mean, you've toured with Jeff Waters. I mean, this guy is incredible. I mean, he's a Dave Mustaine of Canada, but I don't even want to say he's a Dave Mustaine of Canada. He's his own person, right? He's his own band, his own brand, his own sound. And I like Annihilator a lot better than I do like Megadeth, and I respect Megadeth. Don't worry, I like them too. What's your thoughts on Annihilator?
Well, Annihilator, I didn't hear a lot of their material until like I'd heard of some of the early stuff because they were released through Road Racer in the States.
Roadrunner.
Roadrunner. I'm not sure, was it Road? Because like here's what it was. Road Racer was the American Roadrunner. Like they were the same company at the end of the late 80s. And the guy who was the president of Road Racer, Monty Connor, he was sending me stuff. He sent me the Annihilator stuff. So I'm assuming they were on Road Racer too. I could be wrong, but I was getting like, that was the difference. It may be different now because, names change and stuff. But in the late 80s, Roadrunner was Europe. Road Racer was U.S. That was just the guy from Europe deciding to expand into the States. And that's what it was called. So they sent me the Annihilator stuff, and I listened to that along with a lot of other stuff. He sent me Sepultura right at the time. They were just coming up that same era of heavier thrash. And right off the bat, you hear from Annihilator is that there's a lot of focus on the guitar playing and the technical aspect of the guitar playing. So he's a very, very proficient technical guitarist. That's what Dave Mustaine is as well, right? It's that style. I always had a distinction between, but this doesn't mean, by the way, that I don't like that type of guitar playing. But to me, I'm all about raw emotion, and that's what really appeals to me. When I see a guy play his instrument with a lot of emotion and intensity, I'm not always so worried about the technical ability as much as I am about, am I getting a statement of a person's emotion through his instrument. And so for me, my favorite guitar players were always guys like Eddie Clark from Motorhead, John Ricci from Exciter, Mark Gallagher from Raven. Those guys to me are the guys who shred their instruments and beat the living shit out of them, right? And that's what I'm like as a guitar player too, because that's my kind of guitar playing. Having said that, I have a lot of respect and admiration for guys who apply themselves to the instrument in the way a guy like Jeff Waters does, who clearly is, technically superior in many ways to a lot of other metal guitarists. But does that make the music any better than the other music? In my view, it doesn't, but it doesn't make it any worse either.
You know what? There's also two bands that we should talk about that sort of always have been at the wayside. And that would be Sacrifice and Piledriver, who you probably know as well, right?
Yeah, I would never consider Sacrifice at the wayside. I mean, Sacrifice to me are a really important band in Canadian metal. Coming out of Toronto, they were there right with us. They took a little longer to get a record out because I guess they were just depending on what their taste was for a deal. I'm sure they had opportunities, but Sacrifice was right there with Razor and could have been making records as early as we were. We did a lot of shows with them in Southern Ontario. We toured across Canada and the Northern U.S. with them in later on in 1990. But even in the early 80s, like 84, 85, we were doing shows with them. They were a great band. And I have a ton of respect. Like I said, I have my two favorite Canadian bands. They're one of them and Exciter.
Yeah, I mean, also we could also point out that Dream Theater, the lead singer James Labrie, he's from Canada, right? That we
imagine.
Love or hate that style of music. I mean, he's from Canada. He's influenced more of the Don Dokken style of singing than anything, right? But the guy,
who are we talking about?
James Labrie from Dream Theater, the singer.
Okay, I don't know him. I don't.
It's progressive metal, right? It's all good.
I'm sure a lot of your audience does, but I don't.
It's okay. It's cool. What else? What we got else? Lee Aaron, another
metal queen.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk, there's women involved too. We got to throwing some women in there, right?
Yeah.
Well,
next.
But
name saying that.
Even though you love her or hate her, right?
Well, I think she's pretty.
Have a big hit, and
I think she's pretty. I think she has a powerful voice. But to me, that stuff was again. I was on the same label as Lee Aaron, right? We were in the shadow of Lee Aaron all the time. So like, I mean, we always didn't get resources because they were all going to Lee Aaron. So maybe that's a stick up my ass on that. But you know, that was, you know what I mean? Like they were putting so much money and energy behind Lee Aaron, hiring Bob Ezrin to produce her album and everything. You know, they were not really, you know, trying to do much to help raise her at the time. So we always had this.
Was she polite? Was she kind? Was she polite?
Oh, Lee Aaron's nice. Her real name was Karen, but very, yeah, for sure, man. It's just musically to me, it was almost like, I don't know. It was a Canadian version of it was almost corporate. That's, I guess, the way I'm thinking of it. You know, it's almost like this is about selling records. And, yeah, I didn't think there was much honesty in the music. That's, I guess, the best way to put it. It didn't seem real honest to me. It didn't seem it was coming from here to me. It seemed more like, let's put something together that we can get on the radio, and you know, and TNA always is helpful as far as getting video airplay and rotation and that kind of stuff. You know, so from that standpoint, you know, I don't really consider it metal. That's hard rock.
Exactly.
I mean, I'd rather listen to Coney Hatch.
And then there's
I mean, just going back to what Jimmy said again. We're talking Canadian bands here today on 150th birthday. But before there was a Doro Pesh with Warlord. Lee Aaron was one of the ones we can say pioneer. Pat Benatar out of the States around the same time, and I think that's a good equivalent. She was named the metal queen, but there wasn't too many women out there, you know, besides the Wilson sisters and Hart. Yeah. And Pat Benatar, maybe Darby Mills with the head pins. Toronto, Hollywood with Toronto.
We're in a weird place for Dave from Razor.
But also, you had
actually, you know what? I think on my Twitter page, I might have uploaded one of the Headpin songs a year ago and said it was one of the worst songs I'd ever heard in my life. So, yeah, maybe it's not my thing, man. I watched them open for Kiss in 1982, and I just wanted to go get some popcorn or something.
You also have the Drover brothers, right?
Yeah, if we're talking more recent, of course, Jim. We should get into that. Some of the
I can't wait till this call's over and you guys talk amongst yourself and go, well, fuck, Dave Carlo's a hard ass about some shit here. We're trying to be supportive of Canadian bands here. What's going on? No, hey man,
discussion. We're having a discussion.
I'm a proud Canadian. I'm just giving my honest opinion on the music.
No, it's all right, man. It's all good. It would be boring if we all liked the same thing all day long.
Oh no, I have to be honest.
I mean, also for Montreal, you know, Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, Mr. You know, the Jimi Hendrix or the Uli John.
I didn't know he was Canadian. I didn't know he was Canadian. How about that?
Montreal, yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if we mentioned
Triumph. Dave voiced his opinion on Triumph.
We voiced our opinion.
Yes, I know Triumph. Rick Emmett, very great guitarist. There's a drummer who sung too. You'll know her, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And another band that you guys may not know, Brighton Rock. They were sort of.
No, I'm going to take it. Don't get me started. Don't get me started, please.
Brighton Rock. Yes, it was commercial. Yes, it was corporate. But man, that guy can sing.
What's next? You're going to bring up Honeymoon Suite, I suppose.
No, I don't like Honeymoon Suite. Honeymoon Suite is where I draw the line. But I didn't like Brighton Rock. Then in the 90s, I mean, also actually, sorry, I should go back one step. Cryptopsy, right? I mean, you know, if you want to talk about death metal, I mean, you know, Montreal pioneered this band.
Yeah, I heard of that band, and I know that I don't know their music, but my drummer, I think, loves those guys. My drummer, Ryder Johnson, I think loves
Cataclysm. Also from Montreal here.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I don't know if I heard them or not, but I've heard of them. Yeah.
If we move more now into the 90s, you know, a band that is pretty big, and again, following the footstep of Lee Aaron is actually a little more aggressive than Lee Aaron is Kitty, the band Kitty.
Yeah, right? Kitty is much more aggressive than Lee Aaron, big time more aggressive. And we played a show with them back in the late 90s. We did a show with them. I don't know their music all that well, but what I heard sounded pretty good.
All right, so and now we're moving into
what's happening today.
I mean, are there any Canadian bands out there?
What's Dave listening to?
What are you listening to, Canadian-wise?
Canadian-wise, well, I guess if I'm listening, like I'm an old school guy, right? I mean, I'm not. I guess I'm past the point where I'm looking for new bands, but if people bring them to me to listen to, I listen. I'm not out discovering any new bands. So for me, if I'm listening to Canadian music, I'm listening to all the bands we pretty much talked about, right? Sacrifice, Voivod, Exciter, Anvil. You can put those on and crank them up anytime in the car. It sounds great. It's like there's a lot of back catalog there. Sacrifice also did an amazing album in 2009 as well, right? The ones I Condemn. So is this new material? That sounds like a long time ago now, doesn't it? 2009. That's 8 years ago. I can't believe that. That sounds like
I'll throw out some for Dave to go and listen to here. We got one of my favorite. Jimmy knows how I feel. These guys are fantastic. Borealis.
You won't like them.
Out of my terror. I'm just throwing.
You won't like them.
Dave decide.
He's a hard ass. He won't like Borealis.
Borealis and Striker for me are the two bands that excite me the most right now in the Canadian music scene.
Okay.
Two big guys. We interviewed them. Striker's got that old type feel. Arm to the Teeth, which was what we voted one of our best albums a couple of years ago. Borealis Purgatory, which was my favorite album a couple of years ago. Again, these guys got to get out there. They got to start touring. They got to. I mean, they can't stop touring. They got to get more and more. When you're in the studio, like Dave was saying, it's a lot easier to fix mistakes and do stuff. You got to do it live. You got to be able to make that come alive on stage. But those are two bands. World of Silence from Borealis was re-released. Just a good quality band, great vocals, great guitar work, great drumming, great production. I can't say anything more about them.
And I mean, again, let's talk about the big four. If in the U.S. they have the big four, right? Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. What would be the Canadian big four in your mind? And I guess we could reserve a spot for Razor there. So I guess
Dave's a guess.
Dave's a guess. So we'll reserve a spot for Razor. I mean, we could make it the big five. We could play around with this, right?
I mean, if we're talking about if we're talking about big four of just metal or
I would say
true metal, Dave.
I would say metal / thrash / speed. I mean, the big bands, like if they toured as a package,
I think Dave and I we'll agree on
okay,
this.
so I have a hard time excluding certain bands, but I guess from my viewpoint, the bands that are the most significant, I would say you've got Exciter, Razor, Sacrifice, Annihilator, and then you've got Anvil and Voivod as well. Those are the bands. That's the heart of the Canadian metal scene, the origins of the Canadian metal scene, right there.
You know what? You can't argue with Dave on that. Dave named everybody I was gonna name.
I'm gonna argue. I think we have to give our reasons why. Like there's got to be a certain amount of popularity. There's got a certain amount of pioneering. There's got to be a certain amount of draw. And I think Razor, just to start things off, yes, I think there's a thrash on steroids. There is definitely some sort of pioneering there, a good brand name, and it's a draw, right? Annihilator, probably the biggest out of the biggest metal band. Right? I agree with Jeff Waters on this. Worldwide, right? He's been going at it nonstop, full-time job. You have to have Annihilator there. Then there's Anvil. They probably created the speed metal, thrash metal scene in Canada, right? Their movie was big. Their brand name across the world. There's a lot of bands in the U.S. and Europe were influenced by the drumming of Rob or the guitar playing of Lips. And then the last one would definitely be Voivod. Another band that big name everywhere. They did well in the '80s. They're still doing well, and that would be my four if I was to pick four.
So you agree?
No, actually.
The only one you're missing is
he didn't mention Exciter or Sacrifice.
And my reason for Sacrifice, not to say they're not a great band. They're a great band, another pioneering band, but I don't think they had the level of success as the other bands. Like if they played a gig versus Annihilator playing a gig, the room would fill up with Annihilator, but Sacrifice would be like, they'd be more of like an opening situation.
Well, I think Exciter has to be mentioned.
Exciter too, sorry. And Exciter as well.
Dave's list is good with me, and I can't add or take it. I just want to go back.
No, Exciter too, sorry. I will leave it.
Again,
well, I'm gonna make this comment too. Like I'm not as familiar as what I know Jeff Waters is playing a lot more shows and doing a lot more. He's applied himself far more to his career than the rest of us have, okay? But Sacrifice aren't really actively trying to promote their career at all, and yet they still can play a show and fill a room up without any problem. And I think Sacrifice has areas of the world where they're extremely popular and can draw extremely well. And I know that if I do a show with Sacrifice, if Razor and Sacrifice to get together, anywhere we go, the room's going to be full every time. We've done a lot of shows with those guys, even back in the the golden era there, the late 80s, early 90s. And even now, and I think there's a lot of reverence for those guys, and it just depends on who you ask, right? That's the thing about it. It's subjective. Nobody can really say for sure who belongs where. Just what is the relative importance to you? And I do agree that to me, how I come up with the bands that I named, I just think that's the foundation of the entire metal scene comes from those bands. And yeah, I think it all starts with like Anvil went to one level, and then Exciter took it to another, and then Razor and Sacrifice took it to another, and then you've got later on you've got, and Voivod of course is almost like Voivod's a unique sounding band. They've almost got, like, we talk about Rush in hard rock. Well, Voivod's got a unique kind of sound in a harder edged way. They stand out that way. But and then Annihilator is just kind of like carrying on the tradition that was started by the earlier bands. That's kind of how I see it. And yeah, from a success standpoint, from sales, if you're evaluating it just on sales and the ability to fill, like you said, the drawing power, then you got to go with Annihilator at that point as probably the highest level there. But to me, there's it's about where did this music come from and how did it get to where it is and who are the most important bands to get it to that point.
Alan?
Jim, just going to take a global aspect because today is 150 years Canada's been around. That's where we're celebrating Canada Day today. We're looking at the global aspect. I mean, my very first concert was April Wine, Nature of the Beast. Loverboy opened, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So April Wine got all their albums. BTO for me was instrumental. They were one of the first bands ever to give me that sound that I adored for the rest of my life. Rush, of course, has no peers. I mean, there's nobody can compare to Rush. And last but not least, Triumph is one of my all-time favorites. Rick Emmett, I think, is the best all-round guitarist. No, not taking anything away from Dave, but all-round best guitarist.
It's really versatile. Yeah,
this country has ever produced is Rick Emmett. I mean, that's a band, and they had such a positive message in all their songs. There's always something positive, and with the singing drummer to boot. So
yeah, well, I mean,
yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I would just like to add that I think we have to, take our hats off to John Kay from Steppenwolf. In 1968, Born to Be Wild. He coined the term heavy metal. He made it popular. Hey, how about even the Guess Who with American Woman and Mountain with Mississippi Queen? There's some really heavy early tunes there that started that movement. Even the Beatles with Helter Skelter. There's a song that was a powerful, heavy song coming from a band you wouldn't have expected it from, right? So
right.
Everybody had their contribution towards moving things into a more aggressive way.
Well, I mean, just like Martin Popoff said, Canada has their own unique. We have our own unique metal sound or hard rock sound. We take a little bit from the Brits, we take a little bit from the Americans, and that's basically the Canadian sound.
But there's SOD out of Vancouver too. More of a punk style, but some might say they might merit to be mentioned today. So
sure, there you go. You just mentioned it.
There you go.
Well, apologies to any bands that we forgot. Like sometimes when you have these conversations, you realize later you forgot something important, and you go, "Oh shit," But appreciation for all the bands out there that are trying to make some good music for people and entertain people. It's hard to get your band noticed. It's very hard. It's a lot of work. You really got to be dedicated in this day and age, especially. I mean, you have the tools of social media, but you also have a lot of other people trying to get attention too. So it still takes a lot of determination and effort to get there. So you got to respect that. I think it's worth respect. You got to respect that. And before we wrap up here, let me just make a couple of comments about the Razor Fist Metal Mythos piece. I thought what he did there was very good and helpful to my band. I appreciated that a lot. I really appreciated his positive comments. Really a lot. Okay, that meant a lot to us. That he's got a fairly decent following for a number of things he does, and he took the time and energy to do something on us. The only criticisms I'll make of that piece, he was critical of the fact that we weren't seeking management, and that he thought that our issue was that we weren't willing to take on management. And I just want to correct that. He quoted an interview from me that was done about 6 months before I retired from the music business for a good long time. I already knew I was ending Razor when I did that interview, and he was playing clips about me not being willing to get management. You needed to talk to me at the beginning of the career, not at the end of the career, to see what I was going to say about that. I mean, I wasn't going to admit to people that we couldn't get a good manager, because that was a problem for us. People thought we were too heavy.
Like many bands.
We didn't want to admit that. So what I would say in an interview is, I would say, we can't, we're not interested in taking on management. That would be our way of saying it. But the reality was, we were trying to get management. We were getting, turned down by some of the mainstream managers we were trying to hook up with, like I had mentioned before, like the guy from Helix and from Killer Dwarfs. So it isn't like we weren't trying to get management. So that was a bit of a criticism he made of us that I didn't think was accurate. And
this is what we'll do. We're gonna continue this conversation. It'll be an interview, a Razor interview. We'll just stick to completely Razor. We'll go through your career, and then we'll talk about, where you're at, the new album, and all that fun stuff. How's that?
Cool. Yeah, that sounds great.
And we'll set the record straight. I know that Razor Fist, this guy loves you, and I don't think it was done intentionally or not. He's just using the information that was out there, right? That's all.
Yeah, he was great. He did a great job. I mean, hey, he said so many positive things about the band. I was really appreciative. And you can say negative things too. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I just wanted to correct the perception
Absolutely.
that we didn't want a manager. We did want a manager.
And that's why we do this show again. Jim and myself, we're doing it for years and years now, to meet guys like Dave, to promote bands like Razor. And today we focused a little bit more on our home country, celebrating its 150th birthday. Canada.
Hey, we are living seriously. I know a lot of people will say this about their own country. This is the best country on the planet, man. We are so fortunate to live in this country, and to it's just our place in the world is, that we've contributed to so many great things to the planet, and I'm proud and passionate about those things. Not just music, but even in sports, and the quality of our athletes and things like that. We've got a lot to be proud of. We got great comedians. We got there's a lot of Canadian people who are very funny and humorous and entertainers. We've done a lot for the world, I think. And I'm very happy that I live here. I'm glad that this is where I ended up.
A proud Canadian like us all today, especially. And that's why we do the Metal Voice. We're also giving our contribution to the world to talk about our feelings on the metal community. And again, I hope you enjoyed the show.
Dave, thanks for being a guest. Dave from Razor. And we also had Tim Henderson. We had some technical issues there. Sorry, Tim, man. We'll do a show next time from Brave Words. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for all the comments. And Dave, we're going to continue this conversation. We'll get more in depth about Razor and where you guys have been and where you're going. So we'll do that in a week or two, okay?
Thank you. Okay, guys, thank you for having me.
Enjoy the rest of the day, Dave.
Okay, have a great day, guys. Bye now.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.